in the name of personal injury law.
Today we're talking about starting over, and people who have been severely injured need help starting over. Steve Sinas is with us today from the Sinas Dramis law firm, and he's going to talk to us about how the law can help injury victims start their lives over.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So, I'm proud of what I do as a personal injury lawyer. It's often misunderstood, the way I actually look at it is that we are the advocates for our clients in their journey to start over and to pick back up with life as best they can following an injury. The thing, though, that people might not understand is that the result and the remedies available to one injured person may be very different based on how they're injured compared to someone else. So there's a whole different set of outcomes that people can face depending on how they're injured and what type of insurance coverage is available and things like that. So there's a big difference there.
And isn't there also a difference with whether they are somehow culpable for the injury themselves versus if they're completely innocent, an innocent victim?
Yeah, so there are instances where people can be deemed at fault or not have another person to blame, and they can pursue some types of claims. A no-fault insurance claim is a claim to recover medical expenses in an auto accident or wage loss damages that are allowed to be recovered because you were just in an auto accident. Now, if there's an at-fault driver involved, you have additional claims against that at-fault driver. Workers' compensation works similarly. Workers' compensation, the employee could be at fault, but if they're injured on the job, they can pursue benefits through workers' comp. Those are unique scenarios, and a lot of scenarios where people don't have anybody to blame. They might not have any coverage at all because there is no negligence action, there is no action against an at-fault party, and so there is no other insurance coverage, so maybe they're going to be injured without really any other true remedies to pursue. When you have the at-fault party, there are set damages that apply in each given scenario, and those damages are often misunderstood. We hear about money in personal injury cases.
Let's walk through the different types of damages that could potentially be available for an injured person when there is another person who's at fault for the injury.
Yeah, so when you hear about, oh, this person was awarded, $1 million or hundreds of thousands of dollars, you really don't have any idea what that really represents unless you understand the damages that went into the case. So in general, there are instances where the law allows somebody to pursue non-economic damages, which are for pain and suffering, quality of life diminishment that the person is suffering because of their injuries. So that could be one component of damage. There could also be economic damages for medical expenses or long-term wage loss. Also, what I find that people don't really completely understand is that in most personal injury situations, the person has one shot at a case, and that case is supposed to give them the remedies, not just for what they've suffered up until that time, but for their whole life. So if a case is litigated, it's not just the past damages or the present damage. You're also dealing with the person's future damages. And so that's a whole other component of damages in a personal injury action.
Well, and what about, if you have a family member, a spouse, or a child who's severely injured, do the other family members have any rights in that context?
They could. They could have a loss of consortium claim. So if one spouse is injured and the other spouse does not have the same marital relationship with the injured spouse because of the injuries, they could have a loss of consortium claim. The children can have that type of claim too if their parents aren't able to be a part of their lives because of their injury. So there are all different types of claims that could be out there. I do want to explain that in most of these actions, depending on the circumstances, there is at least an attempt to keep the case out of litigation. And usually what you have, and people might not understand this, but if you have an at-fault party, you contact that party, whether it's a person or a corporation, and their defense is handed over to their insurance company. And we deal with their insurance company on possibly negotiating resolution, presenting what claims would be litigated, and so we end up dealing with insurance companies most of the time. The interesting thing is that if the case doesn't settle through that pre-suit process, it goes into litigation, and that means a lawsuit's filed, that means the court then has jurisdiction over the matter, and one day, whether it's going to be a few months down the road or a year down the road, it depends on the type of case, one day there'll be a jury trial where a group of strangers are going to come in and evaluate the case and determine what damages should be awarded based on what the law allows to be recovered.
And isn't there an important aspect when you do finally get to a jury for the injured person to show the jury what their life is actually like now, how maybe difficult it is now? How do you do that?
Well, and that's the thing. When people hear about jury verdicts, again, it goes back to my earlier comment. You can't really understand anything about that verdict unless you understand what law was at issue, what damages were pursued, and what specifically the verdict said. Let me go back to the issue of future damages. You could be awarded a total of $10 million for future damages, I'm just saying for a hypothetical. But ultimately, that award is reduced for present value. So if somebody's awarded future damages for the rest of their life, the actual amount of money that has to be paid to the person is a fraction of that, right? The other thing about the litigation process is that if the case goes to trial, there is a rule that insurance can't be talked about to the jury. One way or the other. You can't talk about whether the defendant was insured or not insured. It's not supposed to come up. So jurors sometimes are confused about who's paying the bill. And I've had cases where the judge has to remind them, just value the damages and don't worry about whether the defendant's going to have to pay out of pocket or insurance is involved. Just don't think about that. But sometimes jurors get hung up on that. But ultimately, when you get a verdict, the other thing I was going to say is that when you get a verdict, the amount of that verdict, whatever it is, doesn't mean it's going to be paid. There could be insurance limits. The collectability of the defendant could be limited, and it could also go on appeal. So
You're going to be dragged out for several more years.
That's right.
So I wanted to talk about one case that was really famous, probably in the 90s when I was in law school, the McDonald's coffee spill case. Yeah. And people were really critical that this woman obtained a jury verdict of millions of dollars for having hot coffee spilled on her. And they really couldn't understand, commentators couldn't understand how she could possibly be entitled to that much money. Can you give us some thoughts about potentially what went into that kind of case to get that award?
I can definitely talk about that, and let me just say this: what I see, I'm not blaming the media, but what I see in the media is that for whatever reason, it's the outlier case that gets reported on. Mm-hmm. All the other cases I'm handling day in, day out, the media doesn't want to talk about your typical personal injury case where somebody was truly hurt and there is a resolution. That's not news, right? The McDonald's hot coffee case became news because of the amount of the award. But getting back to what I was saying, you can't understand what that's about unless you understand the damages. And the reason why that award was so high was because the jury decided to award punitive damages, which are a special type of damage, which, by the way, really aren't recoverable under Michigan law.
Okay.
And that's the other thing. People understand the differences of Michigan law and another state.
Right.
But punitive damages are meant to punish a defendant who had information that directly told them that something was going to be dangerous and hurt people, and tried to, basically just keep on going about things in their dangerous way. And in the McDonald's hot coffee case, there was all this proof that came out that McDonald's knew that this coffee was very dangerous, and if it ever touched skin, it was gonna cause serious burns. And so you would think, well, why is that woman who was injured that way entitled to all that money? Well, she was entitled to compensation. There was a small part of that, but it was really to send a signal to McDonald's: don't knowingly have your products be at such a temperature where you're going to burn people if they ever touch their skin.
And it probably sent a message to a lot of other companies who serve coffee as well.
That's right.
It was a message across the industry.
And it sent, unfortunately, a message to people that there's a problem of frivolous lawsuits
Right.
out there. And so
Right.
it became this case that it sent messages in all kinds of ways.
Right.
And that's, I hope today helps people understand there's a lot more to money and personal injury law.
Yeah, and hopefully we understand more about starting over when you are a personal injury victim.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the Name of Personal Injury Law is brought to you by the Sinas Dramis Law Firm.